me to test this. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. So sorry about the delay. And thank you so much to the DAL folks for getting things back up and running. We're just waiting a few minutes to see if the live stream is up and running, and if it's not, we'll just Zoom this. So welcome to everyone who's also joining us remotely. And it is so wonderful to see all your faces. So thank you.
So my social network says that they were able to hear you talking.
Okay.
On YouTube.
On a live stream.
On YouTube.
Oh, great. Okay. So then, Erin, will you send a note to everyone to join the live stream instead of
See why we all need to have young people living with us. So they can fix this stuff.
Okay, so yeah, this is instead of Lacey or I can just all right, so everyone on Zoom, it sounds like the live stream is working. So go ahead and join that, and maybe we'll just leave this open, but quiet just in case. So, hey, caller. Yay. Okay. Turn that off. Oh, okay.
Where's the vehicle?
Welcome. I want to welcome all of you on behalf of the family of Ken Pierce. Thank you for joining us today. Your presence and your condolences are deeply appreciated. We are here today to remember Ken and to affirm the significance of his life. We are here as well to acknowledge and to give thanks for the wonder and the mystery of life itself. In recognition of this wonder and mystery we know as life, I share this poem titled Out of the Stars, written by the Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend Robert Terry Weston. Out of the stars in their flight, out of the dust of eternity, here we have come. Stardust and sunlight mingling through time and through space. Out of the stars have we come, up from time. Out of the stars have we come. Time out of time, before time, in the vastness of space, Earth spun to orbit the sun. Earth with the thunder of mountains newborn, the boiling of seas. Earth warmed by the sun, lit by sunlight. This is our home. Out of the stars have we come. Mystery hidden in mystery, back through all time. Mystery rising from rocks in the storm and sea. Out of the stars, rising from rocks and the sea, kindled by sunlight on the earth, arose life. Ponder this thing in your heart. Ponder with awe. Out of the sea to the land, out of the shallows came ferns. Out of the sea to the land, up from darkness to light, rising to walk and to fly, out of the sea trembled life. Ponder this thing in your heart. Life up from the sea. Eyes to behold, throats to sing, mates to love. Life from the sea, warmed by the sun, washed by the rain. Life from within, giving birth, rose to love. This is the wonder of time. This is the marvel of space. Out of the stars swung the earth. Life upon earth rose to love. This is the marvel of humanity, rising to see and to know. Out of your heart, cry wonder. Sing that we live. To say that Ken's death has brought us together on this day is true, but it is only a partial truth. We have been brought together today at least as much by his life as by his death. Ken's life has touched each of us in some significant way. During our service today, we will hear from numerous people about Ken's life and how it was significant to them and how it influenced them. We will hear from members of Ken's family first, then from his colleagues and his friends. May we open our minds and our hearts to their sharing as we grieve together and as we celebrate Ken's life.
Whoops. Well, first of all, I'm just overwhelmed that so many of you were brave enough to come out for this. It's just wonderful to see you. It really is. And Ken would have loved, of course, knew and loved all of you and would have loved to have been here. I'm going to go back to the very beginning. Oh, where's my bugle prop? That's okay. Yes, here's my bugle prop that I forgot to bring up. So I think it was 1953. I was a sophomore at Woodrow Wilson High School, sitting in a packed auditorium. It was an all-school assembly for Memorial Day. The principal finished speaking, and then a slender young man stepped forward on the stage, put a bugle to his lips, and blew the most beautiful taps. And those notes, just so high, so true, and so amazing, went from his lips straight to my heart. I noticed this guy. And he came to notice me later, and we got together when I was just a sophomore, and he was a junior then in high school at Woodrow Wilson in Washington, D.C. And he was a really good kisser because of playing all the horns, right? So Ken was born in October of 1937. He would have had his 84th birthday last Thursday, I think it was. And he was born in Washington, D.C., but if he'd come early, he would have been born in Cody, Wyoming, because that's where his family was. His dad was mapping in the Bighorn Basin and mapping the fascinating geology between Cody and Cook City for the U.S. Geological Survey. Ken was a second son, and so he probably had a little lighter load of expectations when that family, as the family was growing up in Washington, D.C. He got to play with the other kids in the neighborhood. He got involved in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. He loved being outside. And he even served as a bugler in Boy Scout camp one year. He worked at that and actually achieved Eagle Scout status for all his hard work. And as we're getting together in high school, that was all wonderful. But then he graduated in 1955. His family went west to the Bay Area of California, where his father had been transferred to the Menlo Park office. And I stayed east. Ken went off to Stanford. He was sure of only one thing. He wasn't going to major in geology. He was going to set his own path. But that shifted after a couple of years. I stayed east, of course. I went up to Smith College, AKA the convent, perhaps, in those days. It was an all-women's college, and we were carefully monitored back in the 50s. But Ken and I wrote letters. We managed to get together during the summers. One summer, I got a job working at the North Rim Inn of the Grand Canyon. He had a job on an oil rig in Bakersfield. He got hold of a car and drove down. We hiked across the Grand Canyon, North Rim to South Rim. It was quite the ordeal for me, but I made it. I just quipped later, that was a test to see if I was fit to be a field geologist's wife. And I passed, apparently. After Ken graduated from Stanford, he came back to Yale University, and it was my senior year at Smith. My roommate and I hitchhiked down to Yale a couple of times. I don't recommend that, but we made it. And Ken and I got together. A little St. Patrick's Day story. Ken came up to have a date, and it was St. Patrick's Day. We went to about the only bar in town. I drank too much green beer. I was sick as a dog. Ken held my head, and I remembered in my misery thinking, this guy is a keeper. So he was. We got engaged, we got married that summer, late summer in September of 1960. And off we went on a short honeymoon in our VW Bug, secondhand yet, the VW Bug, off to a honeymoon and then for him to begin his second year of graduate school. He had a heavy load on him. He had a wife, of course. I was working full-time at the Peabody Museum. He had his classes. He had to pass a German test for proficiency that was required of science majors. He was also of a class assistant for one of the geology professors. And then pretty soon, in October, we found out we were expecting a baby in the spring. And Andrew was born that June in '61. And Ken just shouldered it all. We kind of passed like ships in the night, but we made it through that year. And off we went. And 1963, that was a wonderful summer. He finished his PhD thesis, and we escaped New Haven, Connecticut, and drove down to Kentucky, where he was hired by the USGS to help map the terraces along the Ohio River there. Andrew was born, of course, then, but Daniel came along in the spring of 1964. Then came that real fateful moment when Ken got a call from an administrator at the USGS, 1965, and they asked him, would you be interested in joining a team mapping in Yellowstone Park? You can have a week to think about it. He said, I don't need a week. He did ask me if it was okay to go west, and I had dreamed of that as a kid, so of course I said yes. I think Ken's salary was $7,000 that year. Anyway, we started paying back Yale. Let me get through this kind of quickly. So we went straight up to Yellowstone that summer, and we wound up in the Gallatin range. And I actually saw Bozeman for the first time when I came down to shop. It was a pretty small town. He and a field assistant put in marathon days of mapping, sunrise to sunset, and they came back with great adventures to tell me and the boys about what the animals they'd seen, including a hell of a lot of grizzly bears. I was so innocent or whatever. I thought, oh, Yellowstone is so wonderful. It's like the zoo, but the animals are free. I should have been thinking, I could be a widow. Grizzly bears. When the snows came, of course, we went back to Denver, and we found a home on Lookout Mountain Crest at 7,600 feet up above Golden, which isn't very high for Colorado. It was a wonderful community. The kids and dogs could roam freely on the mountainside. The guys got together to plow the roads, and it was just a great place to raise kids there in Colorado. But one Sunday, we went down to Golden to a church. We found out it was a Unitarian Universalist church. We weren't certain what that was, but we found out the minister, Leon Hopper, had marched with Martin Luther King in Selma, at Selma. And we also found out it was okay to believe in evolution. We knew we had found a church home. We got involved in the larger communities on the mountain and also down in Golden, too. Ken was taught the mountain kids the rudiments of skiing so that they were ready to go up to the ski areas. And he also was a founding member of the Clear Creek Land Conservancy. And let's see, of course, we were always as active as we could be for the Democrats, which were in quite a minority. Those were magic years. And we were filled with hope we were really making progress as a society. The times they were a-changing. We rallied for peace, we rallied for justice, and we all were singing folk music. And our home was kind of like a Noah's Ark of animals. You may hear more about that later. So by 1999, I'll just skip quite a section here that you'll hear about from other people about his work. Ken learned that there was an opening in Bozeman with the U.S. Geological Survey Northern Rocky Science Center. And our kids were all gone and out and about, so I said, well, we better rent the house and go up to Bozeman. And so we came. Ken loved being close to Yellowstone, and he also loved getting connected with the Montana State faculty and helping to mentor students and even take field trips. So he had a great time doing that. Along about 2007 or 2008, he started to have some health issues. We didn't know what was going on, but 2011 he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. It did not affect him. He just kept carrying the load. He just kept going to the office. He only did tell me that I didn't have to pack him a lunch anymore, because if he ate a whole lunch, he would be too tired in the afternoon to work. And he kept doing what he could do. He walked for Tester in the last election. He always had a real serious sense of what his mission was. And I think recently Dan Smith was interviewing him and said, what advice would he give his grandchildren? And Ken said, go for it. I'm going to miss my trumpet man and my bugle boy ever so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Mom. I'm Andrew Pierce. I was old enough that I remember the long trip westward to Denver in the VW Bug with the dog Nani, the cat Willow, my brother Daniel, who was still a baby, and a pile of stuff on top of the VW that was about the same size as the car. Ken had a system for how the top of the car was to be packed and was very meticulous about it. I remember packing up for the summer so that we could rent our house on Lookout Mountain in the foothills above Denver while we accompanied my dad on his field season. I remember our cabin at the Elkhorn Ranch on Sage Creek, where a bear looked in the window one night, upsetting the dog greatly. On our cabin at the Lamar Ranger Station, where a bull bison slowly walked by about 10 feet from our cabin every afternoon, which we always remembered except for once when I was out there playing. And our trailer at Madison Junction near the Waldrops, and our trailer at Mammoth. There was a lot of talk about Pinedale and Bull Lake, and which moraines were from which glaciation, and obsidian rime dating, and lake levels, and there was a mammoth tooth that Ken had found, not in the park, of course. We drank powdered milk, which we hated, and there were mosquitoes, lots of them, which Daniel especially hated. He was allergic to mosquitoes. We didn't know how lucky we were. Our father read to us every night, The Wind in the Willows, and Winnie the Pooh, and the Just So stories. Everyone looked forward to this, and everyone gathered, no matter how grouchy we might be feeling that day. My dad was quite an actor and would do the voices of Piglet and Mr. Toad and the elephant's child getting his trunk stretched by the crocodile on the banks of the great gray-green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees. Ken taught us to ski at Loveland and Bertha Pass in the Colorado Rockies, where we drank tea and tang to warm up and fell asleep in the car on the way home. Especially in his younger years, my father sometimes liked to play tricks on us. One year, he told us that we needed to stay in bed until at least daylight on Christmas morning, rather than getting up our parents at 4 a.m. as usual. Otherwise, Santa Claus might leave us a lump of coal instead of presents, and might even assign us a task as atonement. Christmas morning at about 3 a.m., Daniel woke me up. "You have to get up and see what happened," he said, seething with indignation. We went upstairs, and on the hearth was a big pile of coal, and next to it, a 2-man crosscut saw. Not only had we not gotten presents, but we were going to be put to work sawing firewood. We stomped down the hallway to our parents' bedroom. "Where are our presents?" After waking them up, and took them a while to wake up, Dad first said that Santa Claus must have made a mistake, and then finally he relented and said maybe he left our presents at the downstairs fireplace. We went downstairs and they were there, and we'd walked past them several times without noticing. There was a lot of talk about bears during the Yellowstone years, and a few memorable encounters. One year, I think it must have been in the late 1960s, we made a trip up to Glacier National Park. Ken wanted to show us active glaciers. We got a late start, and by the time we got to Glacier, the campgrounds were all full. So we went to a picnic area and had our dinner, and we decided we would just sleep there. Daniel and I would sleep in the back of the Oldsmobile station wagon, and my mom and dad would sleep next to the car. There had been some discussion about the grizzly bears on the way up, and Daniel and I, after some discussion, decided that we should lock all the doors of the car because of the bears. The next thing I remember is my dad pounding on the window in the middle of the night, saying, "Open the doors, open the doors." We did, eventually, and both parents came piling into the car. There was something very large trying to break into a trash can right next to the car. When it ambled off to the next trash can, we could see what it was. Ken said he woke up when he felt something breathing on his face, which he first thought was Linda, but it wasn't Linda. Needless to say, we all squeezed into the back of the station wagon for the rest of the night. These are just a few of the many memories I have of my father's long and full life and the idyllic early life of our family with our many animals and adventures. As his story ends, I think about what made him who he was. My father was the rock of competence that held our family together, and the fount of curiosity and energy that kept us exploring new things. Even at the end of his life, many decades after the stories from the early years, when he was reduced and limited by his Parkinson's disease, his essential character remained. He really liked people and always saw the best in them, and he could never really believe that the world could be unjust or people could be bad. He was a problem solver and never happier than when he was fixing something or figuring something out. I felt closest to him when we were engaged in a complex task together. And he was determined. Like his parents before him, he had a will of iron. He fought against the ravages of Parkinson's disease with all he had and held his own for a very long time and made the only choice that remained to him at the end.
So I'm Daniel, the middle child, the one who got the lucky spot without having to either blaze the trail or manage the parents as they progressed further into their lives and careers. So in the golden middle years of my childhood, Ken was just always there for us. We hiked and we skied. We played Christmas carols at the Unitarian Church in Applewood, Colorado, with the family band, and then walked around the neighborhood on Christmas Eve, caroling all the neighbors with our instruments. And that was his instigation. We were just an active, engaged family, and pets and animals always abounded in the home. Nani, the Sheltie, and Willow, the yellow cat, came out in the VW Bug along with the four of us and the mountain of gear. After them came Lobo, the elk hound, the cats, Juniper, Silver, Cactus, and the Templetons, my black and white rats. A series of them whose exploits included the great dinner party bathroom lurking incident of circa 1974, the details of which would undercut the solemnity of this occasion just a little bit, but they did involve screaming dinner guests and showcasing Ken's locksmithing skills, as it turned out. And there were, a little bit later, thanks to my sister, innumerable guinea pigs. But as Andrew has described, our years always had two chapters. There was Colorado, which had school and swim teams and skiing in the winter. And then there were the summers, where we said goodbye to our childhood friends. We packed up the station wagon and we headed north and west. And during those summers, from the mid-1960s onward, when Ken was mapping the extent of the Bull Lake and Pinedale ice advances out of Yellowstone, when much of the current landscape was covered in thousands of feet of ice, we camped, as Andrew has described, all over Yellowstone, Lamar, Madison Lake, and then later on in the Tetons. Jen got to do more of that. But it was just days of sagebrush and mosquitoes and camp cooking, and of course bears were often involved. And Ken was a true field geologist. He was always working on foot and on horseback. And for those that haven't been out in the field with a field geologist, it's not like taking a hike on a trail. You go to where the outcrop is. You don't go to where the trail goes. And that means it's down timber, it's stream crossings, it's scrambling around getting a rim rocked. It's just a whole different kettle of fish. But it was fun. But his study then of the Northern Yellowstone Ice Complex received the Kirk Bryan Award from the Geological Society of America. And what he showed was how the ice cap was so high and so extensive that it really created its own weather and thus molded its own future shape and footprint. And as kids, we knew all about his professional life. It was the Bull Lake Pinedale controversy was like this long shadow over several years, where he was trying to navigate this very difficult path between calling the science and the data the way he saw it, and not derailing his career by disagreeing with his elders and supposedly wisers at the USGS, and maintaining relationships with people. It was a difficult path for him to walk. He walked it with a lot of attention and care and integrity. So I'm not sure what we talked about besides science over the dinner table and bears, but there must have been other topics. But at some point, the page kind of turned from, with the Yellowstone glaciation story largely described, and then the Grand Teton kind of version of that progressing. Ken's focus also changed a bit. And he'd started out as a geomorphologist, a superficial geologist, which he also referred to as a superficial geologist. And that's the sort of tribe of geologists that are interested in the surfaces of things and the accidents of landforms in their current state and ephemera like glaciations that sort of wink in and out of existence like fireflies. But geologists deep thinkers, think deep thoughts about deep structures and deep time and the slow turnings of the interior of the earth. And yes, he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder about this. But now, spurred by decades of just really thinking deeply about how the landscape around us came to be, he kind of stuck his nose into the deep structural domain, and together with colleagues who I hope are going to tell more of the story today, he described the pattern of volcanism and faulting across the Snake River Plain and back towards Oregon that grow older and older as the distance from current-day Yellowstone increases. And this was, of course, the track of the Yellowstone hotspot. So when I think about my dad, the first emotion that comes to the fore is just gratitude. I was so lucky to grow up with Ken and Linda as my parents. The childhood that they gave us, the example of how to be in the world that they gave us, is all any kid could ask for. However little we understood that at the time, and despite our outraged conviction that being fed liver for dinner was child abuse. And Dad was engaged and he was loving. Like my brother, I remember in our early childhood snuggling on the couch every single night, and he would read to us, making Piglet's voice high and squeaky and Eeyore's low and despondent. And I also remember that we had to scratch his back and his head constantly, or the show would stop. But he taught us how to build and repair things. He made Kool-Aid pancakes one unfortunate Sunday morning, and we lived outdoors all over the Northern Rockies in the summers. I spent one summer alone with him in the Raft River Valley out in the hottest, most desolate part of Idaho, twisting a hand auger down through tens of feet of windblown soil, trying to find the depth to the gravels underneath. And through all those experiences, he was always answering our questions, filling us in with his vast understanding of how the world works, piece by patient piece. It wasn't until probably about high school for me that it dawned on me that not everyone has a parent who can actually answer almost any question about the physical world that you throw at them, and whose answers actually turn out to be right a very, very high fraction of the time. He wasn't a father as coach or a father as disciplinarian type of character in the least. Okay, well, he might have had a few discipline-related thoughts to share about the rather large garter snake that my brother and I found one time in Colorado and caught and then lost inside the house, and then which was then discovered by him wrapped up next to a whiskey bottle in the middle of the night in the dark kitchen. He had a few words to say after things like that, and his gentle and largely imperturbable nature did not extend to snakes. They were an exception. But our least favorite words from him were "be reasonable" or "that's not rational," because they meant, of course, no. And he wanted us to always do our best, but he didn't push us. That was always our job. And in all of this, I never had cause to wonder, what are my father's inner struggles? What demons is he keeping at bay? And that brings me to a second feeling of just respect. I didn't know those things because he was always a pillar of strength until we got to the later stages of Parkinson's and that strength was stripped away. But he was always constructive. He was always mediating. He was always bringing people together. He was always the person who didn't get involved in the petty squabbles and looked for the right thing to do and then just did it. He lived a life of service and science, community, family, and of commitments upheld and things fixed and burdens borne. That's who he was. What is gone forever now is the simple pleasure of doing things with my father. Fixing a car, setting up a tent, shoveling snow, packing up a camp, felling a tree. We worked well together with few words but much understanding. First Parkinson's and now death has taken this away, and I will miss it. I always felt most connected to him and closest to that thing we sometimes call grace at those times. It won't be replaced. As the notes of his life fade into silence, this is the one that will sound longest to me.
Those were wonderful. Thanks to my brothers, Andrew and Daniel, for those statements. They brought a lot of wonderful memories back. So, I'm Jen Pierce. I'm Ken's daughter. About a year ago at Thanksgiving, I asked my dad if there was anything he wanted. I was thinking he might say more mashed potatoes, but instead he said, "I want to be recognized for my contributions to the hotspot, and I want others to be able to learn about the hotspot." Through the amazing video footage and soon a website by Dan Smith, that will be a reality. And we were going to have that playing when you came in, and we'll make sure that that plays as after the service. It's just a wonderful memory of my dad. Through the continued work of my dad's colleagues and their students, many of whom are here today either in person or on Zoom, we are fulfilling his wish. But I'm not going to talk about my dad's geologic contributions. I'm going to talk about him as a dad. When I was a little girl, I remember my dad playing a game he called the Talking Toes. His left foot was Martha, and his right foot was George. And Martha and George would appear out of the bottom of the covers, usually on a weekend morning when my dad was trying to get some rest and I wanted him to come out and play with me. And so Martha and George would come out, and George was kind of a chauvinist pig, and Martha would call him out on his ineptitude. And of course he would use his voices. "Oh, Martha. Oh, George," as he did with everything else. I always knew my dad would wait for me. I am the youngest in my whole family, and on our numerous family hikes, cross-country skis, and backpacks, I would often struggle to keep up. Just when I would start to get tears in my eyes, looking at the empty trail ahead, I would come around the bend, and there would be my dad. He'd be sitting on a rock waiting for me, and would smile and say, "There's my Jenna-Wren." Either that, or he would hide and jump out behind a tree, pretending to be a bear, and scare the crap out of me. I remember the snow days in Colorado, waking up to a quiet blanket of snow and the sound of my dad shoveling. He would be wearing his fleece cap, he was a man of many hats, with the brim and the ear flaps. He would come in and stomp off the snow and say, "Who wants to plow the road?" Our neighborhood had gone in on the purchase of an ancient snowplow, and all the guys in the neighborhood would kind of compete for who got to the snowplow first, because they all really wanted to plow the road. So we would tromp out there, and I remember watching the wave of snow out in front of the plow on those chilly mornings. When I was about 9, my dad's research focus turned to Grand Teton National Park. I really don't have many memories of Yellowstone. I wasn't born during those times. I had never been to Jackson Hole, and I was a very competitive swimmer and did not want to leave swim team. So I protested loudly about going to Jackson Hole, which I thought was going to be a dusty hole in the ground. I pouted the whole way out in the car, only to be completely awed when we drove into the valley at sunset and saw the magnificence of the Tetons. I spent those summers with my parents, and always at least one dog, in the Park Service housing in Moose, one summer in the historic superintendent's building near the park entrance, and another couple summers in Coulter Bay on Jackson Hole. Those were really magical times. When I would accompany my dad to do field work, he would wear his pith helmet and always have his hand lens around his neck. He would make sure he had the right maps. He had his rock hammer on his belt, and oftentimes a soils knife. What was less certain was how much lunch he might have brought, and if he had brought any snacks. I knew I would have a long day outside in the beautiful Tetons, no matter what. Some of my favorite memories were canoeing down the Snake River with John Good, and also with John Good going on a week-long horseback trip. When I was 18, my dad and I climbed and summited the Grand Teton together. My dad had a goofy sense of humor, making silly faces like that, singing silly songs, wearing his Santa hat for the Christmas family band. I remember going to visit Paris with my mom and dad when I was an exchange student. I was trying my hardest to look chic and European, and I was appalled when my dad came out wearing an Aerobie Frisbee on his head, a fluorescent Aerobie Frisbee. His logic in retrospect was good. It was both a sun hat and a Frisbee, so he was always very practical. Now, as a geomorphologist myself, I really wish I would have paid more attention to those early days in the field. Somewhere in those experiences, I registered that old soils have beautiful red B horizons, and perhaps a BK horizon. Moraines are lumpy and rocky, and most importantly, that the landscape can tell a rich and beautiful story if you are observant and patient enough to listen. In my entire life, I do not remember a single time when my dad got angry at me. Not a single time. Now, as a parent, I realize his patience and kindness were truly remarkable. He was a gentle man. It is a treasure to see him as a grandfather and to see my girls and my niece and nephews experience his kind and gentle soul, as well as the work ethic he always demonstrated by example. He was determined, sometimes to the point of stubbornness, but that determination got him far and kept him walking to the very end of his struggle with Parkinson's. It wasn't until I sent out the announcement of his passing that I realized the large number of people he inspired and mentored. I got over 50 emails. I wanted to share just 2 of these quotes with you. Hi, Jen. I'm very sorry to hear of your father's passing. His work in Yellowstone Lake shorelines was very helpful to me when I was struggling with the interpretation of the Yellowstone leveling data for my dissertation. This was written by Jack Pelton, who was a student of Bob Smith's, which will be notable for some of you. Dear Jen, I was very sad to notice your dad's passing. He provided some key guidance as I launched my thesis project on the Snake River Plain, including spending a day in the field with me in the Raft River Valley. His quiet competence and the fact that such a star in the field would even take time to help a young nobody like me get started is an everlasting reminder and an aspiration to me of how our community should and can work. I always enjoyed our subsequent but too infrequent conversations over the years. He was truly one of the good guys. And that's from Jim O'Connor. My dad will always be with each of us, whether we remember him as Ken, Dr. Pierce, Uncle Ken, Pop Pop, Dad, or Kenny. He lives on in our memories and in his contributions to our planet and to science. He will live on every time we set a volleyball, tell a story, and you get bonus points for silly voices, go on a field trip, or hear taps. He will live on every time we sing a song, or go just a little bit further on our hike, our cross-country ski, or bike ride to see what's over that next hill. He will live on when we are patient and actually listen when our kids and grandkids have something to say. He will live on in us as we speak up for social justice and as we take action to address climate change or political corruption. Just like I knew my dad would always wait for me on hikes, I know he will always be with me now. The last year of my life, my dad was so diminished. He was physically small and contracted. That is not him. In my memory, he will always be striding, striving, smiling, skiing, hiking, singing, and listening. I miss being able to talk to him. Our loss of our Aunt Diane has been accompanied by years of asking myself, what would Diane say? This will now be accompanied by, what would Dad say? Our memories will provide the answers to those questions. So hold your memories tight. Better yet, write them down and send them to me, and I will make them into a book, which I'd be happy to distribute. So thank you. I have one last thing. I just found this last night. This was in an envelope in my dad's chest, and it says Ken Values, and this is in his handwriting. So he wrote this. Human dignity, and that has a star next to it. Success in work, play, and personal relations. Love of all of humanity. Love of self. Work for the utopian. Health, good physical, what does that say? Something, and activity, good physical activity, and good physical activity, I think is the last one. I think he wrote this later in his life. So.
Actually, I think that was in a trunk
Oh,
His Boy Scout stuff.
oh. Human dignity. I liked that as his values. All right. Thank you.
Well, I'm Kathy Whitlock, and I'm a friend of Ken's and a colleague of Ken's and a friend of the Pierce family. So it's such an honor for me to have this chance to say a few words about Ken Pierce as a geologist, a mentor, and a friend. It was Ken and Linda who encouraged my husband Bob and me to move to Bozeman in 2004 to have Yellowstone in our backyard. And it was a decision that we've never regretted. And over the years, we've had many wonderful times at the Pierce home. I met Ken 37 years ago at a social gathering of geologists in Boulder. And I was a young graduate student at the time and just starting to do paleoecological research in Yellowstone. And it was a thrill to meet this famous geologist whose papers I'd read, meet him over a beer, and realize that he was a genuinely nice person. Over the decades, Ken was my go-to person for picking lakes to study, and he was always a sounding board for my interpretations. Many of us suspect that Ken walked every square mile of Yellowstone at one time or another, and it's lucky for the rest of us that he did, because he knew it better than anyone. And our understanding of the glacial geology of the region and the history of the Yellowstone hotspot is unparalleled as a result of Ken's efforts and his work. He was truly a Renaissance scientist who recognized connections between geology and ecology and archaeology and volcanism and climate change and landscape history. He could put all these things together. And in his career, he published over 50 papers, as well as geological maps, field guides, edited chapters, and popular books. The findings in these papers are drawn from meticulous, old-fashioned field mapping, as well as state-of-the-art scientific approaches. And his writings are exquisite for their thoroughness and their clarity. His popular books have introduced thousands of people to the wonders of Greater Yellowstone, and his field trip guides are must-haves for anyone traveling through the region. It's no surprise that Ken's career has been honored by several awards from international and national societies, from the U.S. Geological Survey, and from Yellowstone National Park. On a personal note, Ken made geology fun, and he led countless field trips to the greater Yellowstone area, explaining the geology to other scientists, to students, to church groups, and to friends. By my count, I was a co-leader on about 20 of these trips, and I was just thinking today that this third Saturday in October, in a normal year, Ken and I would be leading freshman students in the Yellowstone class down Paradise Valley, so we would probably be about at Mammoth by now. Those lucky enough to be on a Ken Pierce field trip still marvel at his deep understanding of the ecosystem and its history. I can see Ken standing on the Chico End Moraine, telling the story of the declining days of the Yellowstone ice cap while using his laminated, frayed, rolled up tube of maps as a pointer to point out ridges and hills and valleys on the landscape. One thing about Ken, he never shortened a field trip. Regardless of how late the hour or the challenges of the weather, we were going to get the full story. And my last trip with Ken, just before the COVID shutout, was in fact one of those unforgettable experiences. The weather was terrible. It was a late October blizzard, and there was zero visibility. And we were taking a group of 20 freshmen up Paradise Valley, Ken was pointing out moraines and outwash terraces and ice marginal channels on an utterly blank canvas. We spent part of the morning pushing one of the vans off the side of the road that had slipped off the side of the road, and student power, we got it back on track, and we kept going. And finally, at the emigrant rest area, I decided that we should call it quits. The students were cold and wet, and I wasn't sure if our rental vehicles would make it up to Mammoth, and I wasn't sure if we got there if we would be able to see anything, and it was time to stop. And Ken was not happy about that decision, and he was very reluctant to change course. And so instead of going further, he beckoned the students to stand under the awning of the restroom, and there he gave an impromptu lecture about the history of plate tectonics and the history of the Yellowstone hotspot. And the lecture lasted for over an hour, and there was no pause. So I don't know how much the freshmen learned that day about geology, but I do know they were all impressed with the geologist who was leading the trip. And Ken's knowledge and his persistence and his passion was a talking point for the rest of the semester. In closing, I will just say that I will dearly miss Ken, and I wonder how I will function without his wealth of knowledge as a resource. I don't think I'll ever be able to travel down Paradise Valley without hearing his sonorous voice in my head describing the landscape. It's one of my great privileges to have worked with Ken Pierce, spent time with him in the field, and to have gotten to know this amazing Pierce family. So thank you.
I'm Joe Licciardi, and I'm also a friend of Ken and a longtime colleague of his. And a lot of what I'm going to say is probably going to be similar to what you just heard from Kathy. We've had some similar experiences with Ken in the field. But I'm really grateful for this opportunity to say a few things. Thank you, Daniel. In remembrance of Ken, and although I don't think I can properly express how important he was to me as colleague, a mentor, and a friend in just a few minutes, I'll try. And I know he was those things to many others in the room here today. I first met Ken in 1997 when I was a young graduate student just starting to do geologic research in Yellowstone. Little did I know it at the time but this marked the beginning of nearly 25 years of collaborating closely with Ken. And even though he was immediately welcoming and friendly and easygoing, I was a little awestruck at first, as I'd read a lot of his papers, classic papers on glaciers in the western U.S. One of these reports that really stood out was his landmark study of the northern Yellowstone ice cap, USGS professional paper that he published in 1979. And the sheer amount of work that Ken invested in this monumental paper is just stunning. Ken called it a story in excruciating detail. And it's no surprise, and this was mentioned earlier by Daniel, that this publication earned Ken the prestigious Kirk Bryan Award, one of the highest honors in our field. And that report was and continues to be a huge inspiration for me in my career path, and I know it's held in the same high esteem by pretty much anyone else who's read all 90 pages of it. Ken continued to publish many other papers on the glacial history of Yellowstone throughout his career, including some major reviews that we collaborated on and published just a few years ago. And I know he was really proud of that work that we did together, and so am I. I feel incredibly privileged and fortunate to have worked closely with Ken in Yellowstone country for so many years. It was always inspiring, always fun to be in the field with Ken, even when the weather was terrible, which it often was, as we heard from Kathy. With a few sweeps of his hands and his ever-present rolled-up laminated map of Yellowstone that anyone who's been on a Ken Pierce field trip knows the map I'm talking about. In a clearly phrased explanation, he had this uncanny way of bringing the landscape and the geologic story of that landscape into vivid focus. And you could just tell that he knew these mountains and plateaus and valleys like the back of his hand, and he loved being in the field, and he loved sharing his knowledge about those landscapes. But when listening to Ken's usually soft-spoken and elegant descriptions on a field trip, it would be easy to overlook the fact that his sharp insights were based on years and years of arduous research. Ken himself would never point that out. He was very humble about his unsurpassed skills as a field geologist. He much preferred to give credit to others and generously offer his wisdom to support their careers. It's certainly true for me. This past April, I got an out-of-the-blue phone call from Ken. He was excited to talk about new projects on the glacial history of Yellowstone and some field sites that we hadn't had a chance to get to together yet. He knew he wouldn't be able to join me in the field, but he encouraged me to keep pushing forward with those projects, and I assured him that I would. We spoke for about a half an hour, mostly about geology and just about how he was doing and other things, and it was a really, really enjoyable conversation, the kind that you can only have if you've known someone for a very long time. A few months later, shortly after Ken passed, I spent some time in his office to help sort through the treasure trove of research materials that he left behind. And I couldn't help but notice it was at the top of the stacks of papers strewn around the office. There were notes, maps, other materials that were related to that final conversation I had with Ken about glaciers in Yellowstone. And I'd like to think that was Ken's way of reminding me of my promise to continue working in Yellowstone. He wasn't going to let me get away with that, not doing that. And I do intend to keep that promise. But being in Yellowstone will never feel the same without Ken there to help guide me, talk about new ideas, and have some cold beers with at the end of a long day in the field. And I'll be forever grateful to Ken for his many years of guidance and support and friendship, and I'll miss him dearly. Thank you.
Well, it's an honor to be here with all of you and the family, and we've all kind of grown up together. I'm Lisa Morgan, and I'm a friend and a colleague of Ken's, and I'll just say a few words. We're gathered here today to celebrate the life and contributions of our loved one, Ken, one of the kindest, and most gentle human beings I have ever known. I think most anyone who ever met or worked with Ken felt this warmth as well as his brilliance. Ken was one of those geologists whose meticulous observations and careful fieldwork supported his overarching approach to geology in trying to understand the what, how, why, and when of geology, and in particular, in unraveling the geologic complexities of Yellowstone. His approach to science was science with eyes wide open and without preconceived assumptions. His detailed mapping allowed Ken to read the landscape like few others ever have. And likewise, he understood Yellowstone and its evolution better than most anyone I know. And man, was Ken passionate about Yellowstone. All things Yellowstone. Eventually, that passion fell under the very wide umbrella of the track of the Yellowstone hotspot. I had the great honor and true pleasure to work with Ken on the track of the Yellowstone hotspot for over 35 years. I first met Ken in 1977 when I came to work at the USGS and I was in his branch. I was the grunt for the Snake River Plain project, and Ken was mapping faults exposed along the margins of the plain. Eventually, I did my master's and PhD on the volcanic rocks along the Snake River Plain margin, which took me from American Falls to Jackson Hole to Yellowstone. Ken always took a deep interest in my work, and when I was finishing my dissertation, he asked me, "What do you think about the Snake River Plain being a track of a hotspot?" I said I didn't know, but I did know it wasn't a simple story and that there were many complications that required address. So that's how it all started, our collaboration and our friendship and his mentoring of me on the track of the Yellowstone hotspot. Ken and I, and sometimes with others, many of whom are here today, have written a ton of papers on the track of the Yellowstone hotspot and many other Yellowstone-related topics, such as heavy breathing and deformation of the Yellowstone caldera, the glacial history of the Yellowstone geo-ecosystem, the detailed history of faulting along the track, and large hydrothermal explosions since the last ice recession. With Ken, the landscape was always moving and changing, and it was through Ken I, and I'm sure many of us here today, realized how truly dynamic the Earth is. Ken and many others, we all led so many field trips together, and they were so much fun. And the dialogue that happened in those field trips was like phenomenal. Ken continued to probe the many questions in this dynamic system right up to his death. He never stopped asking. In fact, we just submitted a manuscript for publication in which Ken is a co-author and provided a real key to unraveling one of the puzzles in that paper. And I'm now working on another paper that Ken and I started a couple years ago that will be authored by just me and Ken. And Ken, to this day, he's here. And he's continuing his passion. Ken's mind never stopped working, and his scientific curiosity was infinite. He was always asking probing questions, and Ken's passion to completely understand all the details, every single one of Yellowstone, never ceased. Ken was not just a humble, awesome, and brilliant scientist, but he held strong beliefs about the world and being human and seeing situations from others' perspectives. He believed in equality, in fairness, in justice, and he never failed to speak up about wrongs in our society. Ken was a brave and courageous soul, and as a human who acted on his principles and values. I know this to be very true, as Ken was a sincere and trusted friend who weathered very difficult times with me. And for that, Ken paid a professional price, which was most unfortunate, but he always stood by me. And I know he's standing here with me and all of us today. He is here. Ken was not only my dear friend, mentor, and colleague, but he was that to many. He was generous in his time and knowledge with so many, and for that, Ken will always hold a special place in our hearts and in our minds. Working with Ken was like working with someone who not only mastered three-dimensional chess, but four-dimensional chess. He was truly a multidisciplinary scientist who crossed disciplines in geology, with geophysics, with ecology, with geochronology, with archaeology, with climate, with palynology, with botany, without any trouble. This is reflected in his work and collaborations with many here from a broad range of disciplines. And with that, let's raise our thoughts to the evolution of the greater Yellowstone geoecosystem and to Ken Pierce for his amazing contributions over the last 60 years, and be thankful that we knew and were touched by Ken. I love you guys.
We're going to have Annie and Sabine say a few words from the family.
Take your mask down now. There you go.
Ken Pierce is known to his grandchildren as Pop Pop. Pop Pop never wanted to turn around any time when we were on a hike. He always wanted to keep going and see what was over the next hill. Pop Pop loved projects, and especially in his later years, he wouldn't be satisfied until his project was done.
No, Annie, it's yours. I don't know. Please.
When we were at the cabin, Pop Pop would supervise us while we played in the mud and sand on the banks of the Clarks Fork River. He joked around while we made mud soup in a bucket. He would always cheer us on when we were trying to get the courage to jump off the bridge. 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready and go, girls, go. When Pop Pop and Grandma Linda came to live in a little house in Boise, we remembered that they would give us chocolate milk and we would steal Grandma Linda's gum. Whenever Pop Pop and Grandma Linda would come to visit, or we would come to visit them, we would spy on them, and they'd always be in really funny poses or positions and snore really loudly while they were taking naps. We would try to steal Pop Pop's phone and make us laugh so hard that we had to bring pillows so that they wouldn't hear us. As other members of the family have already said, we loved it when Pop Pop would read to us. He wouldn't read like he was forced to. He would read with enthusiasm, like he had met those people in the book and he had captured their personalities. I don't want to remember Pop Pop as the person taken over by Parkinson's. I want to remember him as kind, funny, and gentle. Thank you.
This is submitted by Meredith Reheis, another colleague of my dad's, a song that she wrote for him.
I probably met Ken through the Colorado Scientific Society when I was just 26 and mapping cold quadrangles for the USGS. But my heart was elsewhere, and Ken knew that. During a second bout in grad school at CU and working part-time, he encouraged me to write a couple of papers on topics that I hadn't dreamed were interesting enough to publish. One of those papers got me in hot water and through the Colorado. I probably met Ken through the Colorado Scientific Society when I was just 26 and mapping cold quadrangles for the USGS. But my heart was elsewhere, and Ken knew that. During a second bout in grad school at CU and working part-time, he encouraged me to write a couple of papers on topics that I hadn't dreamed were interesting enough to publish. One of those papers got me in hot water with a senior scientist, but Ken's experience in similar situations helped me maintain perspective in that feud and in later battles as well. We only worked together a couple of times. In 1998, we collaborated on field work for 2 days, collecting samples at 50-centimeter intervals from a 70-meter thick section of fine-grained deposits above the Snake River. The bluffs were near vertical. We sometimes belayed each other with an old ratty hemp rope and camped at night, fortunately at a park with showers. We shared many field trips together, often to Ken's stomping grounds around Yellowstone. In camp settings, Ken would frequently rouse the troops in the morning with reveille on the bugle. One activity we enjoyed together was singing both old songs and new, and if Ken carried the melody, I would harmonize. When he and Linda moved to Bozeman, I wrote this song parody for him. Enjoy.
In Kentucky, bedrock's pouring, mapping limestone leaves me snoring. Rocks are old there and they're seldom seen. Not much action in the Pleistocene. Take me west, country roads, to the place I belong. Teton Mountains, our whole river, take me home. Yellowstone. All my memories gather round there. Heavy breathing, hot spot I me home, Yellowstone. Take me home, Yellowstone.
I want to thank everyone who has shared their memories of Ken so far in this service. And now I want to offer an opportunity to those of you who are present here and have not yet spoken. I would ask you to remember Ken. Remember what he means to you. Remember how he influenced your life. Remember his traits, the traits that you admire yet today. And as you remember Ken, I would invite any and all of you to spontaneously share a word or two with all of us. This will not be a well-choreographed sharing. Instead, it will be a time when a number of people may share their word or two at the same time. That is okay. The intent here is to lift up our words that speak volumes about Ken. If you have several individual or paired words that come to mind, you may want to speak a word or two and then wait. Wait a few moments and speak another word. I now invite all of you to fill the air in this space with special words about Ken that have come to your mind and that have come to your heart.
I'll say something for Jim Keller, a dear friend from Colorado. He said this: a large number of people will talk of Ken's knowledge, intelligence, and accomplishments, but I want to mention his humility, his friendship, and patience with people like me.
Athlete. Laughter. Kindness. Perseverance. Hardworking. Other words.
Ken and Linda have always shown up, and they've been supportive.
I'm going to hand the mic over to those that talk.
I met Ken through my major professor, Maynard Fosberg, who was a soil scientist that worked with Ken and Dave Love and whatnot over the years. But I met Ken with Maynard at Pritchard Pass down by Fall Creek in the southern part of the Tetons. And perseverance comes to mind because Maynard had a truck-mounted backhoe, and they dug it must have been 12 feet deep, and then we went as far as we could dig with the backhoe, and then we hand dug further and further and further. And I was just Maynard's grad student and helping out, and they had me hanging almost upside down at the bottom of the pit to get that one more soil sample. So Ken could have Maynard do the soil analysis. But I always remember that, and just the perseverance of going for that one last layer. We needed one more, and getting dark and that sort of stuff. And Maynard saying, well, we don't have to worry about the pit falling through because it was in loess. And loess you can dig straight through and not worry about collapsing. But being upside down and grabbing samples. The other thing that came to mind too is, I had to go back, or I forget why I had left, but Maynard and him kept working. And Maynard had this 1954 truck, which was, the year I was born, with a truck-mounted backhoe. And they kept going into Teton Park. And they dug soil pits in Teton Park to verify different things. And one of the things Ken was a little bit worried about it because he didn't have permission. And Maynard said, just put on your hard hat and look official. And they went on and just dug a bunch of soil pits with nobody even pestering them. But anyway.
Hi, my name is Mike Knapp, and my wife and I met Ken and Linda 8 years ago. My wife came home from the dog park, and she says, oh my gosh, she says, I just met Edith Bunker with a PhD, and it was just Linda. And our dogs have had play dates a couple times a week ever since. So Banjo is sort of a high-class poodle, and we have a hound dog. And it only took Banjo about 2 years to figure out that, what am I doing with this hound dog? Anyway, as I said, they both still love each other. And what I want to say about the Pierces, Ken and Linda, is that they're the most generous people we've ever met in our life. And just being around them, since my wife and I are both teachers, and their whole family is so brilliant. I just want to be around them, and hopefully with osmosis, some of it would come into us. So anyway, we really appreciate the Pierces, and I really miss Ken. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ken Cannon, and I'm so grateful to be here. I first met Ken in 1987 when we were working on the Jackson Lake Archaeological Project. I'm an archaeologist. And I remember the first time seeing him, and it was him and John Good were walking down the Snake River Plain. And at that time, the Snake River, Jackson Lake had been lowered because of they're rebuilding the Jackson Lake Dam, and so it was this denuded landscape. And Ken and John were walking down to the archaeological site that we were working on, and I was just so impressed with him. And the very first moment, this is what a geologist looks like. He was out there in the field clanking with all his gear. He probably had a coring rig and or an auger with him and the Spud Buster. And he invited me, I don't know, probably about a week or so later to come out with him and start working on coring some of the shorelines along Jackson Lake. And from that moment, I think we started developing a really nice relationship. And he taught me so much. We worked together in Jackson Lake on other archaeological projects up along the Yellowstone Lake and in other places in Yellowstone. And I just unfortunately never got a chance to thank him for his friendship and his guidance over a long period of time. So today, I would like to say thank you very much, Ken. I miss you.
Thank you so much.
As our service draws to a close, I want to let you know that bagged lunches have been delivered, and people are encouraged to pick up a bagged lunch. And instead of eating here in the parking lot, Linda has invited people to their home to eat together. And
In the backyard.
in the backyard, yes. Thank you, Linda. And as this service comes to a close, I want to share with you a benediction that Ken was very, very fond of. This benediction was inspired by the writings of Henri Frédéric Amiel and was often spoken by Ken's sister, Reverend Diane Phillips. You will find it in your order of service. Life is short, and we don't have much time to gladden the hearts of those who travel with us. So, be swift to love, make haste to be kind, and may the blessings of God be with you.
As this is the end of the formal ceremony, we will be playing the wonderful video that Dan Smith put together of my
Well, I'd like to talk a
dad in the
little
field.
about the Yellowstone
welcome to
hotspot
listen.
and some of the things that led up to the discovery of it. I did.
And then we have Finlandia, we have a exit from
Well, I'd like to talk a little about the Yellowstone hotspot and some of the things that led up to the discovery of it. I did work way down the Snake River Plain in the Raft River Valley, and that it was always, there was something up to the north that had a story in it from there. And everything really crystallized after the 1983 Bora Peak earthquake. And we were looking at the distribution of faulting that in the whole region. And I knew Lisa Morgan, who had actually done her thesis work on the next older volcanic field than Yellowstone, and invited her to work with me on this to try to describe what we could. We could see faults on the north side of the Snake River Plain that seemed to be particularly active, and we could see them, that they went on a trend right to Yellowstone. And then we could see a set of similar faults that also were quite active, that trended down towards Salt Lake City. And we also noticed that the Snake River Plain went right, bisected these two trends, and we knew something, that there was a volcanic progression. So it appeared that two big Earth features were related here. One was the succession of volcanic events, and the other were these zones of particularly active faulting, arrayed kind of like a bow wave about a boat that moved up the Snake River Plain. So it became clear that, and this is sort of a classic way geologists think, and that is we saw patterns. And if two patterns converge, it's particularly meaningful. And then we added one third pattern, and that is the general high terrain around Yellowstone. So that led to the greater articulation of this hotspot idea. Well, during the last glaciation, the Yellowstone area, when the ice built up to its full amount, which we call full glacial, 95% of the park was covered with ice. And ice was going over the top of Mount Washburn, the highest place in the middle of the park. It's 10,200 feet high. We're overlooking the Black-tailed Deer Plateau, a large meadow terrain in northern Yellowstone. And this consists entirely of glacial deposits laid down during glacial recession. The bulk of the deposits are inside what we call the Deckard Flats limit. And in this large plateau, a lobe of the ice from the Yellowstone River area spilled over into this area and pushed out into this large kind of plateau. And as this ice receded from the outer to the inner position, at each position, a set of moraines in the central part of the plateau, ice margin, cane gravels was deposited. So we have this sequence of recessional deposits that probably has 15 different stages that you can subdivide out of it, each of which represents an ice margin, and the deposits laid down along this ice margin. We're here on the crest of Mount Washburn at 10,200 feet. And this is a glacially polished and striated chunk of bedrock that's been rotated a little by frost action. And the high polish and striations on this indicate glaciation during the last glaciation. south to the north and across the top of Orangeburg Range. And it also indicates that the ice levels were rising to the south of us towards Yellowstone Lake, probably to about an altitude of about 11,000 feet above sea level. The idea is that a stone held in the base of the glacier is dragged along the surface of the bedrock and scratches it and polishes it. And there are many stones together, and there's also sand. So it's very much like taking sandpaper to a board, polishing it that way, and also having some coarse grit in the sandpaper that's leaving coarser scratches across the polished surface. This is the discovery site that demonstrated that the ice levels in Yellowstone were quite high. The levels in the Yellowstone Plateau reached up to 11,000 feet, and that during full glacial time, ice flow was from the south to the north. Previously, it was thought that the major glacial effect in Yellowstone was ice coming from the north in the Beartooth Range and carrying some granites to the south, as indeed happened, but that did not happen during full glacial conditions. That only happened during glacial buildup and recession.
We have this lake basin. The lake itself is 90 feet deep. We've seen today it goes at least 20 feet deeper than that, 110 feet deep. And that it's surrounded by flood deposits, a bench that's maybe 100 feet above that, and actually a flood bar that is 300 feet above that. So flood water is 300 feet above the height of the Crescent Lake. We're coursing down the canyon past where Crevice Lake is here. And Crevice Lake itself is surrounded by these flood deposits, boulder on boulder, cross-supported flood deposits.
Imagine being camped someplace above 300 feet.
Yeah, if you were.
And hearing it coming down the canyon. Can you imagine what that would be like?
Awesome, and they're probably, the waves is going to be
Yeah. And the jets on that front and they're shooting up like that. Like the parting of the Red Sea.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, all these deposits that we're looking at, you wouldn't have seen that. You'd have just seen the waters. Probably not even been that aware of the deposits. The roaring torrent.
Even Kipper snacks.
That's amazing. I would never have picked it.
We're taking all of it.
Well, there's enough for one more.
One more small crack. When we were working down in Jackson Hole, one she and I had a bad back. And Ken showed me this exercise, where you kneel down, you pull your arms in, all hunched up in kind of a fetal position. He was stretching tendons, and I thought to myself, God, this must look like a great lunch stop. And these people contorting after they eat. It's logical. And look at this one. The top of this thing is just covered. It looks almost like a marine.
It's got the right form we're looking for. This has got a nice broad crest and a very gentle valley inclination. Boulders on the crest, but 50 years ago, the only thing we could have called this was a moraine. It ain't.
That's right. People would argue that the moraine is, but the size of the boulders is what gets me. That granite. You got cobwebs on. That's good. screws were up. They were stringing from your hat down to your shirt. Had an inkling, you know, that the Hardy Rapids played a bigger part in Yellowstone's history than it was thought. We were walking along the tree, we were going pretty fast because we were late. And Ken stepped on a chipmunk. He stepped on a chipmunk. I claimed he did it deliberately. I really don't think he did. It sure looked like a deliberate act. And the thing was squirming, and of course, he'd already passed over the chipmunk, so I had to kill it. Hey, what do you have to say for yourself?
Well, I couldn't understand why the chipmunk ran towards me. We were just sort of walking along, and it figured its escape route was unfortunately right underneath where I was going to step. I still feel bad about that.
We're on the Travis Lake and staying at the Lower Black. So again, nothing to
We really hit it straight on though. Okay, so
Is that pretty characteristic?
I don't know.
Loose?
It'll be loose like that, but when we get a frozen core, you can see the laminations already very taut. And you can see them here too.
Yeah, it does have some threading on it. It's sort of
Well, this is quite an interesting place for the combination of geology and archaeology right here at the outlet of Yellowstone Lake. Years ago, I noticed that there's something anomalous about this place, that the river has a really low gradient. It's almost flat, although this is the outlet of the lake. And we have shorelines here. And that, another problem about the shorelines was that they were thought to be quite young, and yet some archaeological evidence that was known but not paid too much attention to by geologists indicated this was really old terrain over here. Over there, about the level where the highway is, we have Paleo-Indian points which indicate age. So there was some real problems, and we didn't and it looked like we'd have to put geology and archaeology together in order to make some progress on it.
We certainly know from the archaeological record that people have been here for over 10,000 years, and how all that relates into this folks' origin list.
I wish these origin lists were a little bit more specific than they would tell me just where the lake was and what the river looked like. I guess at times it was a vigorous flowing stream. That was probably observed. At times it was high, and then went low, and then went back up. And they probably observed it. And in a sense, we're trying to recreate this history that wasn't written down and is lost in the oral tradition.
We certainly know that a lot of these hydrothermal explosions occurred during the time when people were here, so somebody must have witnessed that also.
Yeah. The youngest one's just over here for 3,000 years ago, at a time that the lake was low. Well, here we are on the shore of Yellowstone Lake, and this section's gotten eroded out of the bluffs. This is the Mary Bay 2 explosion deposit. It goes from up here, and we can find sand beneath it here. And it was formed by a big explosion, steam explosion out of Mary Bay. And in this site, we can see that it's been covered by well-sorted, sheet-bedded open-work pebble gravels. And this indicates that it was in a lake environment after the explosion occurred. And the bedded sands that we can probably come over and get a better view of, you might want to do that. Right here, dig this out. And here we see a nice shallow water sand, so that this explosion occurred in a shallow, when the lake covered this area, it was a shallow lake at this site. Now, looking at this beautiful columnar jointed basalt across the Narrows Canyon of the Yellowstone River, I'm reminded of a field experience I had. I was working here and quietly studying the basalts, trying to figure out why they were different across the river. And an older couple drove up, and we're looking at across the river, and did see this beautiful columnar joining, and looked at it for a while, and then one turned to the other and said, the way our government spends money, it's beyond me.